Good morning. Continuing our journey in Hemshech Samach. We are at the bottom of page 22 in Samach, and we're coming to the conclusion of this subject matter and conclusion of the mimer as well, of the discourse, discussing the two stages in the transition from experience of one level and dimension of divine pleasure as we elevate to another higher paradigm, higher dimension. And the two aspects of the two interfaces that he called was one called the Nahar Dinar, the river Dinar, a fiery river that divests is the word I was using. Strips is a good word. I saw in the ChatGPT some very good language that can be used here. I liked some of it. One of them that I liked was that it burns out, being that it's a fiery river. So the expression here was that it burns out. Just let me see the exact expression I liked. Burning away the prior kalim or the prior garments of a lower level of Gan Eden, a level of divine pleasure. And the Amud focus is the absorbing and becoming absorbed in the higher level of Gan Eden. And that is both an element of Bittul. One is the first level of Bittul, the second he called Bittul Sheni. And yesterday in our last class, he compared it to, in the notes, he compared it to the two Kruvim in the Maimer and Torah Er. But even more so in the parentheses, the Maimer from the Mittler Rebbe, the Tailed Eda, that comparing it in davening, that we also have these two aspects, that the Keved Reish, the seriousness, the reverence, the submission, the bittul before davening. And then comes the stage where you become to be ready to be absorbed and elevated in Aliyah V'Iskalus, and then finally being elevated directly and being absorbed into the higher level. And the second thing he compared it to, Yesh Lemer Gamkein, to Birurim, the Aliyahs HaBirurim from Briyah to Atzilus. First, you need to extract, essentially strip the spark from the Klippus Nega and the Ra, Shemizbardim Ba'mara, through Eskafia, but then you still don't have it absorbed in Atzilus until you have a Gili of Shema of Atzilus that helps absorb the spark into the levels of Atzilus, which is called Bir Sheni Shemomayel Lamata. And then Yechelim the Kol Ba'alakuz Atzilus, and that's the Bittul Amiti Mamish. And as I wrote in the group, the ChatGPT that Yitzchak posted actually is a very good summary of the process in a very, I would say, sophisticated English, and we can take a lot of words, language from there in understanding this whole topic. And that's where we're up to right now. We finished that paragraph. Now we're up to the last paragraph on page 22. And I was going to come back and bring it back to Gan Eden, discussion of Gan Eden. And keep in mind, the whole Gan Eden is all reflections, ha'ara, of the divine pleasure, not Eden itself. We'll get back to Eden later, the next discourse. But meanwhile, we're speaking about these levels, but there are many levels. That's what he's going to continue now. So the last paragraph, page 22, the Samach Vav, the pages can be found at samachvav.com. So let's go. Ubezeh, everything we just discussed, these elevations, these levels, with the interfaces between that allow and help the transition to go from one state to a higher state, which essentially means you have to strip and you have to divest and you have to suspend a lower level in order to experience a higher level. In another expression that I liked from AI in this context, I'll just quote it, which I like the way they put it, was that is the idea of, let me just see. Yeah. No neshama can pass from one level of Gan Eden to a higher one while retaining the spiritual garments of the former. Because basically, like we discussed, it's a framework. Just like with Rab Zera, there's the methodology of Talmud Bavli, which would confuse and not allow him to absorb and be absorbed in the methodology of Talmud Yerushalmi. The same thing in all states of spiritual consciousness. When you climb to a higher level, the previous level has its own parameters, and you want to go beyond those parameters, and that is called growth. That is called growth because you're constantly, like he says, every perception is a boundary, every delight is a form, every form blocks absorption into higher elikus. Very well stated. But that's really other words for what we've already discussed. And so I'm just confirming that what it says there is very consistent to everything we've been learning here. So now he says, now in that process, he goes back to sum up. And this whole journey, there are many, many elevations. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, many. Ribu aliyas ma'id. She'elam ha-neshamas, the neshamas ascend and climb midarga ledarga, from level to level, from dimension to dimension. Sheyeshribi madregas began Eden, because there are many levels of Gan Eden. So even though we spoke about Gan Eden Atach, Gan Eden Elyon, there are many levels. It's just in general, we break it into two. And I was going to say we actually, Bechlolus, Nechlokim begimul mini Gan Eden. Now he really is going to definitively state that there's in general 3 levels of Gan Eden. The Ilim is Biyah. So now he's explained that there's a Gan Eden in each one of the 3 worlds. In Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, 3 general levels. Shehen Chalukim Me'ed b'madregosam. They're very different in their level, in their dimension. And he's going to give now examples of the differences between them. And then he's going to add that there's also a Gan Eden in Atzilus, which you probably don't hear very often, but he's going to say there is that as well. Because remember, at the end of the day, Gan Eden basically is taking delight and pleasure in divine consciousness and divine experience. In Atzilus, that's happening as well. So even though we usually speak about Gan Eden in the world of Bria, Yetzirah, or Asiyah, like he just said, but we'll soon see, he also mentions it's in Atzilus as well, without going into detail. But the concept makes sense because, again, it's like these are spiritual levels that exist on all levels. So now he's going to give us some examples, which till now he has not done. Till now we've been talking about levels. He just said one level, you need to forget that level in order to climb to the next level. But what can we get actual examples of these levels? I gave some examples, but the Rebbe Rashab is now going to give actual examples, which is from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, not the Teres Chaim Maimer, not the Maimer he mentioned Vatel Deda, but the Maimer that this whole Maimer is based on, which I pointed out in footnote 1. It's a Maimer from the Mittler Rebbe Drushe Chasana called Lahavin Ma Shebe Bracha Mesameh Chosin V'Kala. So here are the examples he's going to give us examples of the different levels of Taanug that are chelukim b'madregosa. That's the key thing to remember. We're not talking about a pleasure in the same paradigm. We're talking about different paradigms. So he's going to give now practical examples of different levels to explain and to help us understand how this journey takes place. Ukamoi. First example. Taanug shebasiyah b'melocha yafa v'klei na. So a craftsman, a potter, or anyone who shapes something like an architect, a carpenter, an artist. So he does something. So there's pleasure in when you're doing a fine art. Malachi yafa literally means a nice piece of work, but that can apply to anything. Or kleina, a beautiful vessel or a beautiful product that you've created. So when you create something, there's a pleasure in it. Anyone who's ever created something, we're talking now, this is a Maisa thing. This is you build something. Like he says, a Meloche Yafa, a nice piece of work. It could be building a business plan. It could be building a building. They're not saying exactly, it could be a piece of art. And clay na, a beautiful keli. So there's a pleasure you get from that. When a person does that, there's pleasure in that. There's great pleasure. One takes great pleasure when you produce something really beautiful. People admire it. I'm not just talking about because of the compliments. You feel a sense of fulfillment and accomplishment. Look, I created something that was worthy looking at, can be used well. It's very efficient. It helps people. It's something to admire. Umakol mokim. So even though there's tainug in that experience, nevertheless, there's higher levels of tainug. Ein hareich klal legabe tainug shebemidas. It's infinitely distant from another level of tainug in emotions. And he's going to give an example. What is it? One's emotional pleasure. The pleasure we have when we experience love and kindness. And he's not saying whether it's giving love or receiving, just in general. There's deep pleasure when a person is loved or gives love to someone. There's also tainug in that. How would you compare the tainug to that than the tainug in something that's more craft-based, meaning a product-based, if you wish, or work-based? So he says that tainug is much higher, the tainug in Midas, than the tainug in Maisa. U'kamoy Avram Avinu olav hashalom. So the tainug gadol b'hashpos chasdei. Here he clearly says giving chesed. That when Avram bestowed chesed through hachnosas sarchim, through his greeting guests, or his kindness that we find, he had tremendous pleasure from that. It's a tremendous sense of fulfillment and pleasure within. So when you compare these two types of pleasure, they're both pleasure. It's nivdal berech, it's quite a distance in the level. One is far more sublime than the taanug in Asiyah, which he means the malachi yafa and the klei noah. A taanug that comes from building something or creating something or crafting something beautiful. So taanug gashmi, because the taanug in Asiyah is a taanug gashmi. Meaning the taanug itself is a human experience and sensation, but it's coming from a thing of gashmi. And the taanug in midas is a hergesh ruchni, far more sublime, and you could say ethereal. Okay, so far 2 levels of taanug, and you're going to see this is an example for Asiyah. Now we talked about Yetzirah. We'll soon spell it out. Midas. And now comes even a higher level of taanug. The taanug of seichel. So he says, "V'ataanug shebemidas," and this pleasure, this delight or pleasure or fulfillment or sense of contentment in midas, in emotions, ein areich, next page, page 23, l'gabei taanug shebeseichel v'asaga. There's yet another taanug. When a person understands something well, and you comprehend something, there's a pleasure and a fulfillment in that. That compared to taanug b'midas, it's also quite a distance, quite separate. Even in the hergesh ruchni of midas, this is even more ruchni. So that's the example he gives here. Basically, taanug and Asiyah in a nice piece of work, or a nice keli, taanug in midas, love, kindness, and taanug in seichel. And I was going to say, this is a dugma. L'mayla began Eden atachten d'Asiyah. So too we have from this an example. The first level of taanug is pleasure in Gan Eden atachten of the world of Asiyah, which earlier he mentioned was Gan Eden atachten. Shebe'en areich l'gabe Gan Eden di Yetzirah, which is quite distant, infinitely distant, compared to Gan Eden of Yetzirah, the world of Yetzirah, shezeu kamei taanug b'midas, which is comparable to the second level of taanug in emotions and feelings. Well, amaylam is Gan Eden de Bria, and higher than these two comes the Gan Eden of the world of Bria, shehu kamei taanug dahasaga. That's comparable to the taanug in comprehension, and that's correct because actually, it talks about that the level of Bria is connected more to Moich and to Bina, Yetzirah more to Midas Zah, and Asiyah more to Malchus, which is Asiyah. Like we know, Bina Mekanna B'Kersaya, remember Bina is nested, comprehension, Seichel is nested in the world of Bria. Midas Zah is Mekanna, is nested in Yetzirah, and Malchus, which is in this context Asiyah, is nested in the world of Asiyah. And then he adds now, Ukamoy Kain, Yesh Gan Eden Batsilis. So just like there's in these three worlds, there's also a Gan Eden in Atsilis, Shenivdul Be'erech Mebiyah, that is quite distant, Be'erech, compared to Biyah, separate and distant from Biyah. Doesn't spell out what that is in the example, like what's higher than Seichel. But Pashtus, it would be, compared to Seichel, it would probably be the Taanug in Elikus itself. Even though Bri Yetzirah Asiyah is also in Elikus, in Asiyah, in Midas, and in Seichel, I'm just speculating because it doesn't say it explicitly. I would have to look it up elsewhere. But it could be this is in the emphasis on the godliness in it. Not so much the godliness within Seichel or Midas or Asiyah, but pure godliness, which is a little more transcendent experience in contrast to the other three. But again, that's speculation on my part. It doesn't give any indication what this is. But he does say there's another level. And clearly, you see here, Gan Eden, first he says three general levels of Gan Eden, and now he adds the fourth in Atzilus. But he said at the outset, it's many levels. These are just, in general terms, the general categories of Gan Eden. And these are the aliyahs that the neshama goes through. And each one of them, the neshama has to divest itself and strip itself from a lower level to experience a higher level, as he's going to, as I think he's going to state. But even if not, it's very different. So a person has pleasure in one level, in order to experience in a pure form a pleasure on a higher level, you need to go through the Nahar Dinur that we talked about and the Amud, the pillar. I'll stop here for any questions. Let me just add one more line. Ubeprotius, this is in general. Ubeprotius, when you break it down, yesh b'zeh ribi madreges me'ed. He states it again very clearly. When you break it down, in these levels itself, there are a multitude of levels, many levels. Okay, let me stop before he goes back now to the journey itself. Any questions? Okay, so let's continue. Ubezehu avedus hanashames, and this is the aved of souls. This is their work, the journey through these levels. Neshama says they come down below, they're in a state of mahalchim. Mahalchim means they're constantly moving, they're travelers. Souls are called travelers. The expression is mahalchim bein ha'oimdim. Malachim are called standing in one position, stationary. Malachim are stationary, and neshamas are mahalchim. They're journeyers, travelers, sojourners, as they say. V'im kain. And as such, since the souls are traveling always, kamoy kain, I don't know why they add the chaf, kamoy, it should be kamoy. Kamoy ha-neshama shaba me'elam hazel leGan Eden. Like a neshama that travels from this world into Gan Eden. It's not possible for them not to have an Aveda in a state of movement because they have to move. If you want to go from Olam Hazeh to Gan Eden, you have to travel. One second, let me just read this correctly. One second. Vim Kain, Kamoy Kain, and Neshama Shabbat Efsher. Trying to read the exact sentence. Anyway, the content is the following. So, like a neshama is traveling. So the fact that we say that the neshama in Gan Eden is yeshvim v'nena ki'im mashe yeshvim v'nena miziv hashchina. Well, the expression is that in Gan Eden they sit and they take benefit, and they benefit from the ziv, the reflection of the Shechina. Elevada yesh b'hem gam ken aveda b'chinas hiluch. You have to say they certainly have. You certainly have to say that they have an aveda in a state of movement. Let me read it, and then I'll go back to the line to understand exactly the. I didn't figure out exactly how he's phrasing it. V'hainu ba'aliyas ha'madrega she'elim madrega la'madrega b'chinas ha'aras ha'eneg. So what is it referring to? The aliyas of the levels of the soul as it goes higher and higher in the reflection of the eneg of Gan Eden, she ha'aras b'chinas ein sof. It's a reflection, a state of ein sof, meaning it's endless levels. V'aliyah b'zehu inyan hiluch shalei b'hadraga. And therefore the aliyah from level to level is not commensurate. It's a paradigm shift. And therefore, so the manner of how it elevates is through first divesting or stripping itself, suspending the bittul of a lower level, of the first level, and afterwards to be absorbed and included in a higher level. And that's what it means, Gedeshim, the Holy One. All day, they are praising forever. B'li hefsek. They don't stop. It's ceaseless. Ba'aliyas madrega aden shir. That's why it's Selah. Selavad is forever because it's a constant state of elevation. You never stop. Level to level, ein shir, without any measure, without any stop. The line, that line, let me just go back a moment and read it again. That's correct. The key I can't really figure out. The content is very clear. He's bottomly saying that the neshama is below in this world is for sure a state of mahalchim. Even in Gan Eden, whether we call it nenim, yeshvim nenim, yeshvim is not mahalach, it's sitting. He says that also you have to say is also a constant state of aliyas because of the different levels of taanug, and the neshama doesn't rest as well. The real mahalach happens only in this world. That's why the Avodah in this world propels us to levels that are even higher than Gan Eden. To Eden itself, as we're going to learn, and we learned earlier. But even in Gan Eden, because it's a reflection of Eden, of Ein Sof pleasure, so there too is a constant journey. That's clearly the Teichen. The Ki'im, not sure exactly how we're supposed to phrase it exactly, but that's the content. So the Havana, the understanding is clear. The wording is a bit, I still need to read it a few times to see how to word it properly. Okay, finish the paragraph, stop again for any questions.
We perhaps say that
bottom line is clear that he's summing up here everything we've been learning about the elevation through Gan Eden and the need for the transition, for the interface as we climb first to divest of a lower level and absorb a higher level. Go ahead.
Could we say that the kiyim over here means notwithstanding the fact that they are being enemies, they still have to have this avodah of hilo?
Yeah, I think that's probably, but it's not usually how kiyim is used. That's why it threw me. But it could be, it's probably right what you're saying. Vim kain, kamay kain, so how would you read the whole thing? Vim kain, what's the kamay kain? Kamay, forget about the kain. It's not kamay kain. It's kamay anashama. That comes from ilmaza. That is definitely in a form of hiluch. So notwithstanding, that what yesh v'nenim is ivashchined, certainly vade, you have to say there's also aveda b'chinas hiluch. Yeah,
right.
I think you're right. I think that's the way to read it. Yeah. Yeah, shukayach for that. Good. Okay. Any anything needs to be clarified here? Everything is clear. I think to make this very really relevant, what I think is really powerful is not to talk about in abstract terms what's going on up there in Gan Eden, in these abstract levels, but actually by the example he gave with the Taanug, the different levels of pleasure, something you don't usually think about. Because, we go about our day and we have different experiences and things that we enjoy and things we have pleasure in. We don't really think in terms of growing in that regard. But when you think of it in these things, that a neshama, a soul grows in its spiritual consciousness and spiritual awareness of things, and it grows in its. And remember, Taanug here, I was going to talk about it, but I'll talk about it later more at length, where he talks about Taanug at length. Remember, the word pleasure, whenever I use it, I feel a little inadequate because it's not what we usually define as pleasure. Most people say pleasure. I had pleasure at a nice meal last night, or I have pleasure in certain. It's so overused in material matters and very mundane matters. I'm not talking about necessarily even things that are dvarim asurim, prohibited. Even in a very simple level, the way we use pleasure is so in a certain way petty. But when he's talking about here, he means the deepest level of a person experiencing fulfillment. That's why I used before the word fulfillment, contentment. It's like when you have pleasure in your family, or like you spoke about love, pleasure in love, or something you've achieved, a real achievement. You see clearly he's talking here pleasure in something that is something to be proud of, not just the way we use. So the words itself, I just wanted to qualify that that he's talking here, obviously, on higher levels, not the way we use it in the usual pedestrian daily routines. That's all I wanted to add with that. Talking about here, in other words, it's a different level. It's not just experiencing something, but you feel filled up by it. That's what pleasure is. You can do something, and you did it, and that's that, and you move on. Or you can feel that type of like some accomplishment, a sense of accomplishment that fills us up. I'm just, maybe we have to look. Maybe ChatGPT can provide us with some more words, synonyms for the word pleasure that would fit more in this context. So you can ask that query and see what comes up. I see myself feeling that I'm lacking the right words in English. Maybe some of you have some suggestions, which is also great. I feel it, I sense it, but I don't know if I have the full, I need to work on describing it more. It's not even a word, it's really more of a describing, what does it mean to really have, like you said, Taanug Gadol in a Ma'alocha Yafa, or Taanug Gadol in Hashpa'as Chesed, Taanug Gadol in Seichel. What is it that we feel when we understand something well? What is it? How do we describe that full sense of fulfillment, contentment? I don't know, again, the right words.
Is it
say? Go ahead.
Delight?
Yeah. Does that change the equation? It's a good word as well. I think it's a combination of more than one word to really get the whole sentiment. But anybody else? Go ahead.
Pleasure just seems to have a more physical connotation. I think you need a word that combines that spiritual sense of transcendence, like transcendent pleasure or something. Maybe you need two words.
Yeah, maybe you need more than two. Look, I mean, I could describe it as the best way to describe these things is describing how you feel when you have it, not just the word. It's like when a person worked hard at something, at a project, and they finish it, and they sit and look at it quietly, without anyone around. There's a certain sense of, I said, accomplishment.
Satisfaction?
Yeah, that's another good word. I don't. This is not a quiz that we're going to find one word. I think it's a combination of many words, but satisfaction is good as well. But to apply it to all these scenarios here, satisfaction, delight, pleasure, they're all good words. I'm looking here more for the description of the full experience rather than just one word. That's really what I'm groping for. But I think we're getting closer, right? Everybody gets it?
Ineffable. It's ineffable. That's part of what it is.
Okay.
I would rather
Later in Samach Vav, he's going to talk about the difference between Ratzon and Taanug. And these are, big concepts in Chassidus. And people use it very easy. Ratzon means will, Taanug means pleasure. And I honestly feel that it's never really been fully articulated properly. Because remember, we're dealing here with super-conscious faculties that associate with Atik, Arich, and Atik that are higher than the Koiches Makifim, Kaya Yechida, that are higher than the Koiches Pnimim of Seichel Mides and Chabad Chagas Nehi. So even though there is Taanug in Seichel and there's Taanug in Midas and Taanug in Asiyah, but Taanug itself is a more exalted and more elevated state. So a person could have Seichel and not have much pleasure necessarily. Not that they have pain, but it's not the focus is not the pleasure. You're understanding something. Taanug is one of the faculties of the soul, but it's considered one of the koiches atzmim or koiches makifim. It's considered a very close to. Taanug is the closest thing to the very essence of the soul. It's not the essence of the soul, but it's the closest expression of it. Like when we spoke about Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, that God desired to have a home in this lowest of worlds. I elaborated. What does this mean? Nesava, taiva. I mean, taiva can mean to crave, to lust, to desire. It's a form of pleasure. So we discussed that it doesn't mean pleasure as we usually understand. It means it's a level of experience that reflects his essence more than anything else, because everything else has defined parameters. Like seichel is already a structure. And the same thing, midas, emotions, feelings. Whereas taanug is the closest thing to what am I experiencing? Like when you say, I take pleasure in my children, I take pleasure in my family, my marriage, and my mission in life. You're talking about much more than just a faculty. You're talking about an expression of the all of you, but it's manifesting in some way. Right. So we're going to learn later, not so much later, but in probably another 50 pages from here, maybe further. He's going to talk about a lot about these two faculties of the soul. So I'm already preparing for that, to be honest, what Taanug really means as a so-called the closest expression of all of you, of all of your soul. Whereas Seichel would be an expression of one faculty or several faculties, and Midas would be of other faculties, and Maisa would be of other faculties. Taanug is more of all of you enjoying or being fulfilled by this experience.
I think the issue is that it's not just a noun, it's a noun and a verb. You said experiential. So when you say a noun, that's a state, like a static thing, an experiential thing, like what the ChatGPT was explanation, which I thought was really great, is that it's fluid, it's not static. In other words, it's moving. It's not, you're not just.
Well, it's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
Once you get into the verb and the noun, we'll learn there's a lot of states of Taanug as well. There's Taanug as an experience, and there's Taanug as a state of being, where you are in a state where you are just in a state of having pleasure, not necessarily experiencing pleasure. Like it's the result of the experience ends up being in a state of a certain contentment, a certain fulfillment. But we're going to talk about this a lot more later. Just beginning the conversation. So, yeah.
And just to note, there were two suggestions in the chat. One was from Tikva Dean. She said ethereal pleasure, and Mrs. Schneider said bliss.
Bliss. Oh, interesting word. That's a good word. Again, I think in this context, you probably need more. You need a bunch of words, but they all add up together. Yeah. Remember, Hebrew versus English is a metaphorical language. One word can require an entire sentence of words in English to explain it. English is far more of an explanatory language. I mean, words are explained. That's why a Hebrew word is very metaphorical. Like when you say, like here, taanug can mean many things. Pleasure is probably more limited, but yeah, go ahead.
One more thing, I think that we have to do the start point from our Gashmic because if we will try to go further without establishing as Taanug in Gashmis, we will not feel the full expression of this word, because the purpose of us to be created was in the body, and this is one of the main point for us to be. And if we will exclude our pleasure in Gashmic, we will lose the point.
Okay. Okay.
I don't remember us ever being spending. I'm glad we did it. This is special that we spent this much time trying to find the right English words to explain Taanug. What is even more difficult for me to wrap my head around is not when we talk about the Taanug of a neshama in Gan Eden, but rather the Eberster's Taanug. What does that mean? I mean, I'm not. I know this is maybe a digression, but he does. He doesn't need to be pleased. He doesn't need to be blissful. He doesn't need to be
I gave a whole
satisfied.
class. I gave a few classes on that in the early part of Samach Vav when we talked about the Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, exactly about what you just asked.
Yeah, we talked about desire, but he doesn't lack anything. So I guess I should go
So,
back.
but I
and
discussed that at length. What does that mean when he doesn't lack anything, and how do we explain desire in that context?
Yeah, no, you're right. We I guess now that you say it, I remember we did, but it still mystifies me.
It's still, yeah, it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of review. But I dedicated very deliberately a lot of time to that because it's a very important topic.
Yes, yes, you did.
But it's not what we're talking about right now
No,
anyway.
of course
because
not.
Yeah,
Of course not. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. I'll go back and listen to it. Thank you.
yeah. As I've pointed out many times, remember, the key thing is to keep in mind that we are talking about divesting. Our tools are very limited because how we understand consciousness is what defines how we talk about these topics. And we're talking about levels that are super conscious. As soon as you talk about divine levels, you're not talking about human. You're talking about something beyond. If we talk about God and the godliness and godly pleasure and the levels of divine pleasure, you're talking about getting out of the framework and the human experiences that we have to experience something on a far more sublime level. And that is where I think it will be the greatest challenge, because we are very used to a certain way of understanding things. And this compels us to go through a Nahar Dinur and an Amud and a pillar in our own way to be able to understand it on a more sublime level. That's really what it comes down to. We're talking about experiencing higher states of consciousness. That's really what this is about in the real way. And that cannot happen as long as you're still in the previous state of consciousness. It's just not possible because that's your framework. That's how your tools will define how you understand things. And to grow in that area, you have to expand your tools or learn new tools, new way of speaking, new way of thinking, which is not always defined by the logical parameters that we're accustomed to. Like the example I always give with the net, that if you're going to use a net of half-inch spaces, you're only going to catch fish of half-inch size, of a half-inch length. If you want to catch a fish that's shorter than half-inch, you need to use a different net. If you want to see subatomic particles, a microscope won't help you. Definitely not the naked eye. So you need new eyes, a new set of eyes, or I should say a different type of eye, conceptual eye, a way of different tools. This is really what this is all about. I find the biggest challenge is that we're using old tools to try to understand new paradigms, and that doesn't work. So you have to then learn new tools to experience the new paradigms. And when you do that, that's when this becomes much more internalized. Right now, it's more of an intellectual exercise. It's like, we talk about Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah. We have some examples. But can you really talk about it in a way that you can tell me what an Atzilus experience is like as opposed to a Bria experience? Or a Bria experience of Taanug as opposed to Yetzirah to Asiyah? That's why you need the Nahar Dinur and the Amud. It's a serious transition. It's not It's not just a matter of changing the language. It's a matter of a whole new experience. So I think that is also part of the very challenge. The very thing we're learning here is what's so needed to be able to absorb these higher states of experience. Now the question is whether what I just said brought you pleasure or confused you.
It's
Okay,
intellectually,
let's continue.
it's intellectually satisfying.
It's
Good.
always delight.
Yeah. I think what it also points up
Well, even when you're frustrated and like you can't wrap your head around it, you also feel delight.
that's a good question. I
Yes,
think we're,
No, I mean
yes,
there's a certain
because
delight because you're on a journey and you won't get it today, you'll get it tomorrow. There is that aspect, of course.
adventure is the best delight. Yes.
well, honestly, I think it's like expanding the kalim of our brain. If we want to bring elikus like into ourselves, the expansion is not going to be immediate. You have to be
No,
you
no,
have to
of course, of course, of course.
has to be a gia. There's delight in the yagia. It's like when you're working out, like
Yeah,
maybe it
no, I
hurts.
understand. I got it. I just thought of another word, thrill.
Ah, that's good.
A thrill, but not obviously we're not talking about of a menial version.
The only problem with thrill, it's so elusive. It's so quick. You cannot have thrill for a long time.
Maybe in Gan Eden you can.
Well, maybe you could if you really internalize it. A person who's constantly in a state of ecstasy, maybe yet another word.
My question is, do the rabbis that wrote this down for us, because of their high level neshamas, do they have a better comprehension of it? They must. I mean, in other words, they're deriving it, so they're thinking through. There's a logic that they derive, and obviously there's a ruach kodesh that they have. But what fascinates me is that they, I would think, clearly understand the term better than we do. So that makes you appreciate their neshamas and their
Well,
intellect.
in general, good writers, and definitely in Torah, use a word, and that word is loaded with layers of meaning, and their hope is that the readers or the people who study, the students, will take that word and unpack it with all the possible meanings. That's why it's so geschmack, you can say. It's another word for Taanug, geschmack in Yiddish. To find, let's say, a sikha from the Rebbe or from the Rebbe Rashab, where they informally explain what they wrote in a mimer. In a mimer, you're going to have the formal language like Taanug and so on. But sometimes in a talk, in an informal conversation they can sometimes talk about it in a way that is like off the record, so to speak, where you get more of the between the lines. But there's no question, especially Chassidus, is all about in between the lines. I mean, I never spelled it out, but the real mastery of teaching this is teaching not just what it says on the lines, it's what's in between the lines, meaning it's the lines that are expressing it. It's literally like musical notes. You could look at musical notes on a sheet of music, and it's complete gibberish. You can't understand a word. But then someone comes and starts playing it on an instrument, and you say, "Oh, wow, those little squiggles or whatever you call them produce such." Because it's just a language. At the end of the day, learning Chassidus to me has always been music. It's about musical notes and learning how to pronounce them and how to articulate them beyond the word itself. Like the or within the keli. What is the word? What is the energy within these words and letters and phrases and expressions? And at the end of the day, what you want is to experience the music yourself and help those that you're teaching also experience music, that they feel the music of it, not just the ideas. That is really what it comes down to. And sometimes either you pick it up, you get a sense of it. It's like a hergish, a sense. That's where you could have two people play the same music and one will sound hollow and the other will sound alive. And or not or and you look for hints, like things that I heard over the years the Rebbe say sometimes he would explain something and add a few words, and you saw how he's articulating what Taanug means. Or the Rebbe Rashab himself in some of his tzichus and Torah Shalom, where he speaks more off the record, off the cuff, like a little more informal, by a Farbrengen, a Purim Farbrengen, a Terskisla Farbrengen. So that's where you get a lot of material. The essay that I wrote on Ayin Beis, at the end of the essay, you may recall, if you've read through the end, I quote things that the Rebbe Rashab said the last day of his life in this world, and I is connected to Ayin Beis, because when he said it, literally in the last moments before his neshama went up to heaven, it's coming from a obviously very visceral and personal place, but it's the idea that it says in Ayin Beis in a much more haskaladik intellectual context. And when you can do that, then you bring together the two best worlds, the ideas and the music of it. Now, I don't say that lightly. I've shared with you many times that in the year Tovkuf Nun Ches, Nun Zayin Nun Ches, when the Alter Rebbe began to publicize his manuscripts of Tanya. So we're talking about now the year basically 17. What would be Nun Ches would be 98, 97, 1797 approximately. So the Chassidim, the Frierdiker Rebbe tells us in the Sikha, the Chassidim came to the Alter Rebbe and they said they don't understand Tanya. We're talking about the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe back then. And the Alter Rebbe said to them in Yiddish, which means because you can't understand something when you only have half of the story. What's the other half? He said negina, melody, song. That's what he said. And I remember that's like amazing. The whole Tanya, he says, is half the story if you don't have song. Now, what does song mean here? It doesn't mean when you read Tanya, you should read it with a sing song. He means the spirit of it, the music of the Tanya, the poetry of it, not just the ideas. And the same is with all Chassidus. So that is the ultimate real challenge to really learn Chassidus properly and personalize it, is to hear the music of it and then find a way that you can really apply it to your life, where every level you can say, I can find an example of this Taanug, of that Taanug, of these levels, that level, the Nahar Dinur, the Amud, the pillar, and so on. So it's also part of this. And I think when you talk the word Taanug, right away, to me, it elicits all of that, because that's what it means. You're not just talking about the intelligence within it. You're talking about the thrill, if you wish, or all the other words we use, the ecstasy now, the bliss, the pleasure, the satisfaction. What else did we come up with? Delight. Okay. Let's see what ChatGPT comes up with.
Okay, I'll take that as homework.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to finish, but I think we'll stop. The next paragraph is the end of the mimer. So I'll do that in the next class. But he's going to take these ideas and now answer the questions that he asked at the beginning of the mimer. But it's all within the topic. And then the next mimer will begin the next page. Okay. So I think I'll stop here. The end of the paragraph on page 23. Okay. We're having very good spirited discussions here. That's really good. It's very pleasurable.
A lot of Taanug.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments, questions?
Do you want to turn off the recording?
Yeah, I'm gonna stop here. I just was seeing if anything is relevant to the very class itself. Okay, so we're stopping middle page of page 23.